Welcome back to Parsing the Truth One Bite at a Time. I'm your host, Stacy, and I'm here with my amazing co-host, Becky Passmore.
Hey everyone, thanks again for joining us.
Today's episode is one we're very excited to share. It's actually part 2 of our deep dive into the BTK Killer case. And in this episode, we're going to cut through all of the rumors, the blogs, the TV dramatizations, and even some stuff in some published books. And we're going to get to the real story, especially where the digital forensics came into play and helped catch Dennis Rader.
That's right. And to help us set the record straight, we're honored to welcome a very special guest, Randy Stone, the lead digital forensic investigator involved in the BTK case. Stacy and I were honored to hear Randy speak about this presentation and case many years ago. And we're excited to have him on the podcast. Thanks for joining us, Randy. Do you remember what year you presented that to the FBI?
2005 or 6.
Yeah, I was
so.
very
Yeah.
fresh. Yeah.
Randy, let's get started from the very beginning. How long had you been working in digital forensics when you received the infamous purple floppy disk?
So I think we got that in 2005, and I think my first forensic class was 1998 or 99. So I was assigned to narcotics at the time, and we'd go do a search warrant and, kick in the door and take their drugs and their money and their guns and their, whatever else. We'd look at the computer sitting on the table and say, I sure wish there was something we could do with that. And we'd turn around and walk out. So a couple of us got together and started looking for federal grants and everything. So about 98 or 99 was my first class.
And was it with IASIS?
At that time was actually search out in California. But I think my first IASIS class was also 98 or 99.
That's awesome. And did you have any other involvement in the BTK case prior to the digital forensics piece, or was this your first exposure to it?
It had been going on for about 9 months when we did the floppy disk part of it. So when it first came out, he first communicated with the newspaper, and then that communication got to the police department. They got to throw together command posts. So up at training, they took a spare conference room and they called the computer crime unit and said, hey, you guys are like geeks. Go down there and set up a network. And so we went down there and they wanted to, run some networking, some cables and switches and that type of thing so they could have in-room networking capability. So that was the first introduction to it when we first got involved. Part of that was to set up both a phone and an email hotline for people to send in tips. So as you can anticipate, there was a lot of well-meaning, well-intentioned citizens sent in some great information. And then there was just some nuts that just had to send in some stuff. So for many of the nuts, then we had to look at the email headers, where they come from, who's their internet service provider, send them a subpoena, so we can identify who they were and then follow up on that. So I spent quite a bit of the time, 2004, I think it was, following up on, doing search warrant subpoenas for, identify who the people were sending in emails that, either claim to know a lot or were, alluding to different things. The other part of what we did was there was at that time, chat rooms were kind of a big thing. And so there was several chat rooms spun up. Zodiac Killer hosted one. The local newspaper hosted one. So we would hang out in the chat rooms and, just pretend to be just another interested person. And, we're kind of scoping them out and say, well, it's reasonable or plausible that, BTK, would be in, he likes the notoriety, he likes people talking about him. Yeah. So he could hang out in some of the different chat rooms and engage in the conversation, that type of thing. So we hung out there and looking for, that person that appeared to know too much or whatever. That actually ended up resulting in a subpoena to the local Wichita Eagle newspaper to identify some of the, I think there were 6 or 7 of the people in the main chat room they hosted to identify who they were. And as you would expect, we sent them the subpoena the next day, front page above the fold. They printed it. Here's a story.
Yeah.
They named all the screen names of all the people, and they contacted each of the people were interested in, contacted each one of them wanting to do an interview with them. And then they took 2 more weeks before they actually responded to the subpoena with their information.
But during that time, they kind of screwed up anything you could have possibly done with those usernames.
We were fortunate that we actually had some of them calling us, hey, I hear you're looking for us. But the concern was, obviously, if one of them had been BTK, he had a 2-week running head start on us because it took them 2 weeks before they responded back to us on the information we requested. So what else we do?
You were receiving all these emails, but it sounds like it was for more than just like the tips, you're going out and getting the subpoenas on who was really sending it. Can you tell us more about the background of and the reasoning of why that decision was made to do those sorts of things?
A lot of that was leading to the trail of, well, we need to identify who we need to go out and get DNA from. So if you have people sending emails that claim to know information or whatever, something that made them stand out, and it wasn't just a hey, I think my neighbor's BTK type thing. But then it was more sinister than that. Then we would then have to identify them so that way someone can go out and request DNA.
Now, what would you say the turning point was where digital forensics really became a critical focus in the investigation?
So obviously we had the subpoenas, we had the paperwork side to follow up on the emails, that type of thing. One other area that we worked in was two other areas. We had a suspect identified that we did search warrants on. So we analyzed his computer, didn't find anything on there. And then we had one of the communications from BTK talked about a 17-year-old in the county south of us who had committed suicide by train. And BTK sent in a communication saying he was involved with that. It wasn't a suicide. He killed the kid and that type of thing. So we ended up getting the family computer that the kid was using and searched and analyzed that. And we're not able to substantiate anything that BTK was claiming this communication. So those are kind of the first two stepping stones part of it. And then when we got the communication at Home Depot, where the communication said, can I communicate with you using a floppy disk? And so at that point, we had identified some behavioral stuff ahead of that they were kind of asking us, well, what is the potential then based on this? What good's a floppy disk and what can we expect to find?
Wow. So can you describe that moment you realized the floppy disk could hold that key to the identifying beekeeper?
So at the Home Depot drop, asked the question and said, if he can, then put an ad in the paper and be honest. So sure enough, we put an ad in the paper and said, yeah, it's safe, you can trust us. So then he did mail in a floppy disk into KSES Fox News on the west side of town. Prior to that, they were, they asked me questions like, what value is it? What can we get off of it? Is it worthwhile? Should we tell him yes? In addition to that, in that same drop, he had given us a diagram of the BTK lair, which is a 3-story plus a basement building and an elevator and everything. And within that, he had drawn designated areas where there were bombs placed and propane tanks next to the bombs, that kind of thing. Then you get into, okay, so we're going to assume that the next delivery, next drop might have explosives in it. So now we need to do some testing. If we're going to x-ray it, does that impact the data on the disk? So we had to do that quite a bit, do some analysis on that. And then we got the disk and it was brought up to the where the offices were at. And I always joke about this part of it because there I am, like the lone geek on the floor. And, we slide the little switch to write protect it, put it in, do the image like that. And we bring it up, we do the analysis. And then it was a kind of really simple process. Oh, go there, the click there, there's a name. I turn around to tell everybody, and like everybody's gone. There was like 25 people standing behind me. As soon as I say, there's the name, it's like if you've ever been like quail hunting, you step into covey quail and poof, everything goes every which direction. That's what it was like. So it was fun, 10 minutes worth of work on my side, and then I was done. I could go finish my lunch.
I'm glad it didn't interrupt your lunch break too long.
Nope.
But so did you really expect Raider to use digital media, to use that floppy disk to communicate with you? Or was it completely unexpected that he actually sent it in?
So it was unexpected. It was unexpected he made the offer. And then once he made the offer and we said, sure, it's okay. I know a lot of on the profiling side of it and the non-computer geek side of it, there was a very intentional effort and process that when Lieutenant Landwehr was talking, when he was doing his press releases, he wasn't talking to the news media. He was talking to BTK. Oh. And that was intentional. He did not take questions of the news media. That was 100% intentional to build that relationship and build that rapport with BTK. And partly so that way, when we said, sure, it's safe, send in a floppy disk, he knew he could trust us. He was actually doing the interview. He was upset because we lied to him. So it was surprising that he made the offer, but once he made the offer and we said sure, then it was not necessarily surprising that he sent it in because there had been so much effort to build that relationship with him. And then I did the analysis, and we get to one point in the analysis of the communication he sent with it, and is when there had been some confusion in the news media about how many actual communications there were. So he spells them out. Well, this is number 7, and that was number 8, and that was number 9. And then he says, basically the rest of them will have numbers assigned to them in case one is lost or not found. And it was ENCASE. And of course, I'm the only computer geek in the room, so I'm the only one that knows that's the brand name of the software I'm going to use to do the forensics. And no one else would have picked up on that. Between that and when we did the analysis, the file on the disk was called "This is a test a.rtf," and in it said "This is a test." And so you put all that together, and for me, like literally the night we got the DNA back, and they're like basically polling everybody, what percentage? I said 50-50. Between "This is a test a.rtf," and "in case," I was 50-50 that he was just screwing with us.
Let's talk about the disk itself. How many files were actually on it? And then were there some deleted files too?
So there was one valid Microsoft RTF file. It was test a.rtf. And then there were several deleted files. And for those that used Word back then, that periodically it would just crash on you. And so Microsoft's solution to that was, about every 10 minutes, it would make a backup of whatever you were working on. And it would store it as a temp file on the same storage device that your file was on. So that way, if it crashed and you restarted Word, it would go pick up that temp file and ask you if you want to restore it and show you it. So you had at most 10 minutes worth of lost data. So if it successfully got to the next 10-minute timer, then it would delete the previous temp file and create a new one. So if you could recover a sequence of those, then you can get the development process of whatever that document was. So we had a couple of those, and then because it was on floppy and nothing else was really going on, there were several that were referenced that were actually overwritten by the next versions of the temp files.
We're just basically dealing with the RTF file types and then the temporary files from using Word.
Right. Yeah. The temporary was actually the prior version of an RTF, and that was then deleted.
Is it from those temporary files that you were able to recover? That's where you got the information about the church and those church meeting notes?
That was actually the live file, the test a.rtf. And literally, kind of, you got your audience there, so you want to do all the geeky stuff and everything and show them how smart you are, but nope. Double clicked on the document, open it up in Word, went to properties for that file, and looked at the properties, and right there in the properties window, it said, basically the software was registered to Christ Lutheran Church. And at some point in time, there was a relationship with the Park City Community Public Library, and the file was last saved by Dennis. So with that, I'm looking for a Dennis that's somehow related to the Park City Community Public Library or Christ Lutheran Church. And so I Googled the Wichita Park City Christ Lutheran Church. I Googled Christ Lutheran Church. There was one in Park City. I went to this website. On the banner on the left side, there was a who's who for the church. I clicked on that button, and it went to the listing all the players for the church. And top of the list was Congregational President Dennis Rader.
Because I think the media and maybe the book even uses what information came from what piece of digital media. From our research into it, it kind of made it sound like the test one really didn't have anything in it but the Park City Library, and then it was from the recovered deleted files that's where you got the church meeting minutes and the link to the church. So that's not accurate then.
So what we think happened, the way we think it got populated with the information. So within the metadata would be who's the software registered to.
Right.
If you create a document and the first line of your document, like in this case said Christ Lutheran Church, the first line of your document is there and you save it. And if you use that as the name of your file name,
right.
But basically it took the first line of the document and saved it in the metadata. And so that first line of the document was Christ Lutheran Church. And in the interview, he talked about his wife had to go to the library and download the agenda for the upcoming meeting, professional meeting, or their meeting for the church, because his floppy drive on his computer at home was broken. So what we think she did, the sequence of events that we think happened, is she went to the library. So the church secretary emailed him the agenda for the upcoming meeting. The first line was Christ Lutheran Church. Then below that was date, time, whatever it was. His wife went to the library, downloaded it onto a floppy disk, and she may have opened it there to verify she got it, which would then populate it with the Park City Community Public Library content. She gave it to him. He goes to work. He does whatever he does with the agenda. At some point, then he uses that document and basically deletes the agenda, types in his message, and saves it on the floppy disk. And then, that's the most logical scenario that results in all the artifacts we saw being present on disk. And really anything other than that, we would have been missing. Like, if he had done that at home, then we would not have had necessarily his name. If it had not had the church agenda part of it, it would not have said Christ Lutheran Church.
That is so interesting. And where I got that from was that book written by the FBI profiler. I'll have to pull it up, but I know it's said in there all the information I just asked you if it was correct, and it sounds like it was misrepresented in that book.
I always find it interesting. There's a lot of people who were never involved with that case writing books all about how that case went. There absolutely were profilers involved, and they absolutely did a great job. Like the whole theory of the press conferences and that kind of thing, absolutely 100% worked. So there's no doubt that there was a lot of value in it. One of the things about Rader is that he did not match your profile. Yeah, he was not the loner, no family, no job. I mean, he was well educated, college degree, family, was not as abused as a child, so he did not fit the profile. But I think there's a lot of a lot of people out there that maybe work in that field, and I don't know which profile we're talking about, but there's a lot of people that work in the field or an adjacent field that want to have an opportunity to say something about it, which then ends up with a book that is not correct.
Aside from the purple floppy disk, was there any other digital evidence that you analyzed for Dennis Rader?
We did the arrest, and we were staged at a variety of different places. We had plans to do, obviously, a search warrant at his house, search warrant at the library, a search warrant at the church, search warrant where he worked. So I ended up at the library with some of the members of the RCFL out of Kansas City. We did the search warrants there. The rest of our team and some other RCFL members are spread across the other sites. Eventually, the bulk of what we found, surprisingly enough, was actually on his work computer, and he was typing his messages, and he would go print them on the printer down the hall and that kind of thing. Yeah, but I recovered mostly off of his work computer. Well, my report was 347 pages.
Wow.
Of stuff.
Bless you, Randy.
Yes. Well, so part of what started this was Robert Beatty was writing a book, and his book was, I think, 352 pages. So I was trying to beat his book, but yeah, it was. So I recovered a lot of when he would communicate with us, send us the drops, communications. He broke them down into different chapters. So I recovered during the forensics a lot of the chapters, a lot of draft versions of those chapters, a lot of the recovered the temp files from Word where there were previous versions of a chapter. So you can see if you line them up chronologically, you can see where he was adding and removing content from the different chapters. We have that there was a spreadsheet which was his mileage map to all the different places he stalked people and hunted people.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah, it was you look at it, it's kind of weird, like you're trying to figure out what is that, and there was a print version, so like from here straight north is a 65, and then over there you got all these different distances on a spreadsheet. Okay, so straight north from Wichita, about 65 miles is Salina. And so when you start overlaying that with, okay, what city is 125 miles that direction type of thing, then you can start seeing where all he was hunting people.
That is so creepy. You kind of alluded to this when you're answering one of our other questions, and some of it with your answer now, but how did you work on confirming that the metadata on the disk was actually accurate and traceable?
DNA. That was literally it. Here is a suspect. I have no way of confirming whether what is on there is true or not. Mm-hmm. So they went and got DNA. And the DNA was the mechanism that confirmed, yes, it was him. I mean, from a practical perspective, I mean, he could have edited open up in Word, go to the properties page, then change whatever the content was. So there was no way of knowing whether that happened or not. So really, I had to take it at face value. And like I said, the night we got the DNA results back, I was 50-50. So it wasn't until we actually got the DNA back and that really said, yep, this was him.
Well, I think it's also interesting that you mentioned on the work computer, you had a lot of information that he was typing on there, tying himself to the crimes, and he was tracking it.
It was for, now that I'm doing corporate stuff, I find it, odd that, he did it on his work computer, because everyone has access to your work. I mean, all the admins can do something from a security or OPSEC perspective. That's not the place where you want to put something. You don't want your admin to find when they come in to install a printer driver or something like that. None of it was encrypted. Obviously, a lot of the deleted stuff your admin's not going to find when they're installing your printer drivers. You know, I mean, his chapters was there. It was all easily findable if someone was just to look.
Well, another thing was there was tons of stuff that he printed off, like his book and stuff that was found in his office at work, right?
He had printed off a lot of stuff, literally 3-ring binders of stuff, his mileage map. Some of the things he was doing, counter forensics, counter investigation, not computer forensics, but like he would print a document and shrink it down, you know, whatever the chapter was, and shrink it down multiple times and then glue it to a 3x5 card. And what he was after was trying to defeat, like back in the 70s when he first started, the forensics back then was, you know, you run something on a printer or on a copier, and there wasn't copiers everywhere. I mean, there was like 10 of them in the city or whatever it was. And you didn't have a stack of individual pieces of paper. You had a roll of paper that it would cut off the whatever size you chose. So you had the roller track marks and the brand of the paper, and that brand of paper was only in those three copiers in the city during that time frame, and one of them was broken, or you know, those type of things. And literally that was one of the investigation paths. You know, the amount of work effort that they put into the investigation back in the day was just incredible. Like literally, you know, that was hammer bond paper that came out of a HP whatever copier it was. There's 3 of them in the city. 2 of them didn't work or whatever it was, and so that document was printed on that, or was copied on that copier, but by that kind of tracing that process down. So a lot of what he was doing was intended, and he had a criminal justice background. I mean, he had it. Strangely enough, he has the same criminal justice degree that I have. So he was aware of these kind of things, the things they would do to find him.
Were there any legal concerns when analyzing the disc that, you know, especially since it linked back to the church? Was there any legal considerations or concerns there?
Not that I'm aware of, and it would not have been evident until after we did the analysis and discovered the church's name in the metadata. Now I know, like when there's different organizations have different rules. Like I couldn't go execute a search warrant on the Wichita Eagle and just take the stuff I wanted, because the nature of what they were. I had to issue a subpoena or get a subpoena and send it to them. And then they said, well, you got to send it to my parent company out in California. So we had to do it again and send it out to California and abide by California's rules. So there's legal rules related to, you know, do you do a search warrant? Do you do a subpoena? And that type of thing. And especially if the custodian of the evidence is not a suspect. That kind of like, and that like, that's one of the main things, like with a journalist or an author or something like that, that if the possessor custodian of the evidence is not your suspect, there's some rules then on how you handle that, whether you search warrant them and go take it, or whether you issue a subpoena.
Other than figuring out if you could x-ray the floppy and see if it contained explosives, was the examination of the floppy disk pretty routine, or did you have to innovate and figure out how to parse some of that information in a whole new way?
I'll tell you it was routine, but I'll say it's routine now. Keeping in mind, that was back in the very early days of computer forensics. There was literally 4 people in the entire state of Kansas that could do forensics. The 3 of us were at a computer crime unit where we were at, and a KBI agent up in Topeka. And I don't, in fairness, I don't count the RCFL because I think they're over the border in Missouri. So
okay, yeah, they are.
Yeah, they could have done it, but they weren't in Kansas. So in Kansas, there was, I think, like 4 people that could do that at that time. And as you saw from the media and everything, at the computer forensics industry, that was one of the very first successful and high-profile use of computer forensics to solve something like that. So now we would say, oh yeah, I mean, any high school grad could do that. Back then, from a forensics perspective, and really we would not have been able to do that if there had not been, 7 years prior to that, some guys kicking in, doing drug search warrants. Say, I sure wish we could do some of that computer. That started us on that path. So that we were at the right place, the right time, with the right skill set, because of a lot of work that had been occurring for the, literally for the previous 30 years.
And that's why we're talking about this on a podcast today, nearly 20 years later, because we do think it was so pivotal in digital forensics in terms of legitimizing it and then also making it more well known across the country and what it could do.
Yeah, it's actually kind of sad because I was talking with some of the kids I work with now, and it turns out some of them have never actually seen a floppy disk. So we actually have a on-site meeting with the team next week. So I'm going to take a floppy disk there and show them, so that way they can all say they've seen one.
Well, there was just a message on the on the IASIS
Yeah.
message board, somebody was like, "Hey, how can I write block this floppy disk? I got an image."
Yeah, they had a 100 meg zip disk.
Yes,
Yep, I
I
actually
saw
responded
that.
somewhere in my office here. I was just looking around. I've got 2 of those zip disks here sitting on a table somewhere.
Yeah, that's awesome though. And yeah, you're right. Kids don't know what those are and don't know what they look like and
Yeah.
don't know anything about them. So there's some other myths that we want to clear up. Some say the disc had incriminating emails or confessions, but none of that's true, right?
The only thing on the disk was one file, one valid file, and several, chronological deleted versions as they were. And there wasn't a whole lot of time. I think the the total edit time according to metadata was 4.5 minutes. But again, and that's variable depending on names, that kind of stuff. Yeah, he did not work on it very long. The only thing on there was just that file, and it said, this is a test C3 by 5 card for details for the computers we looked at. Obviously, there was a lot more there, a lot of content of all the chapters and the history, and a lot of detail. Addresses of almost victims, and um, different people he considered. He had what he considered his trolling stage, and he was always in the trolling stage looking for candidate victims. And then if he found a good candidate, then he would go into the stalking stage, and he would document that in his computer. And we have a long list of he called them projects and the hits.
So creepy.
Now, when Rader asked the police if the floppy disk could be traced and law enforcement said no, was that ethically difficult for you? Or, tell us about that.
It was not difficult at all. For me, it was like, how dumb can this guy be? And if he's going to accept our word for it, and if he accepts our word for it, then he's not what everybody, yeah, he's been getting away with it for 30 plus years. This guy's got to be brilliant. But no, he's no Moriarty and like that. Like, he was in case on the communication, he can't spell. It was supposed to be INCASE, but he couldn't spell it. And so, no, it was zero ethical concerns among any of us that this is unfair to catch him this way.
Yeah, so how do you respond to people that question whether that's misleading or unfair?
So I've never actually heard anybody complain about that, but I guess
Okay.
they could probably go argue with the victims' families on what their thoughts are on that.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's just maybe people trying to take a stand, and to me, frankly, I don't really care.
Did anything on the digital evidence contradict earlier leads, or did it complicate the investigation in any way?
Nothing I can think of. I mean, so we look at the prior areas, like the earliest, one of the earlier suspects we looked at. The forensics actually, invalidated the claims against him, and also for the 17-year-old suicide victim, where Rader claimed to have been involved with that. The forensics demonstrated that there's no indication that is true. So it actually worked, to the opposite advantage of, that contributed to clearing a suspect from the forensic part, among other things. And we were to, for the family, the 17-year-old, we were able to say, regardless of what Rader is saying, there's no indication that we can substantiate and validate none of what he's saying of a relationship between your son and Rader. So with that, it gives that family some, as much peace as you can at that point. But yeah, we were able to use that and say none of that appears to be true.
So if Rader had used encrypted or anonymizing tools, could that have caused the case to be unsolved?
So if he had done something with that floppy, he could have, but that would be counter to why he sent us the floppy. He wants to communicate with the floppy, and that communication had, for him, unanticipated attachments to it, something that he was not aware of. And he said he did research. So in theory, yes, if he'd encrypted it, then of course we would not got into it. But at that point, it's like, the reason he's sending us the floppy is because he wants to communicate, and to then encrypt communication does not achieve that communication.
And I'm not surprised when he did his research to find out what there was that could maybe track him or tie him to the floppy disk, that he didn't find anything, because even back in 2008, 2009, 2010, there just was not a large volume of information about digital forensics on the internet. And even in the FBI, you had to go to training. So you're going to IASIS or a vendor class, or you were talking to one of your buddies in the office that also did it to see if they had ever seen it. It's not like it is now with a very large and present digital forensics community online working to share information and the new things that they're finding out all the time.
There was no typing into Chat GPT. I want to send a floppy disk to the cops. How do I do it without getting caught? There wasn't anything like that. And the volume of information out there would be, very small and very compartmentalized. And if you didn't know where to look, you wasn't going to find it.
So let's talk about the tools. There's this idea that EnCase was central to the case, but then there's also some confusion about EnCase and what it was doing and what it was used for. So what's the truth about EnCase in this case? Wow, that was a bad ending. EnCase in case.
So at that point in time, we were an NK shop. There was 3 of us doing computer for the forensic computer crime unit. Our primary analysis tool was NCase. Part of that was because, frankly, at that point in time, that was the leading tool out there. And it was expensive, but it was good. It got the job done, and it worked. So I was actually, at one of the ISIS conferences, I think in '99, where 2 guys showed up, say, "Hey, we're writing a tool to do forensics," and that tool later became EnCase. So I was using, EnCase since version 1.19 or something like that. So that's what we were using. It was a good tool, and we needed to look at a floppy disk, and it worked very well for that, and it got us what we needed. Like I said, I was concerned by, in the communication where he said, in case one is lost or not found, naming the name of the forensic tool I was going to be using to look at the floppy disk concerned me. But no one else recognized it. It wasn't until I pointed that out that anybody would. Lieutenant Landwehr, no one else had any concern related to that because they did not know, it existed, what the tool was, how it worked, or its capabilities, whether it could be used maliciously. You remember at the time, an EnCase license was like $5,000 or $7,000. So it wasn't something that a suspect was going to go out and buy. Spend $7,000 to theoretically change metadata, and you couldn't change metadata in the Word document with EnCase if you wanted to. It, by design, does not alter your data.
So get to Landwehr. Somewhere in our research, he was quoted saying EnCase could strip off all identifying information. So was there a misunderstanding about its capabilities, or was that something that Landwehr didn't say, or was approaching with someone else or talking to someone else?
So I think what that goes back to, and I've got a presentation I do, and I actually have an excerpt from a video excerpt from the interview. There was one point pre-confession where he and the FBI profiler were talking with Rader. And during that, basically, you got a point of, "Hey, would you like to know how we, why you're here, how we caught you?" And Rader's kind of like, "Sure." And so they bring out the little baggie, the plastic bag with a floppy, and set it down. "Hey, you know what that's, you've ever seen one of those before?" And so they go back and forth. And during that conversation, we gave him the printouts of the metadata and everything. And during that conversation, he says something to that effect that, basically, that if you delete stuff, or you erase it, you do whatever, there's people out there, the skills and the training and the tools and EnCase, and they'll bring that back. And doesn't matter what you do to it, they're going to be able to find it. So, and the way you worded that was pretty close, I think, to what he said as he's talking about using EnCase to catch you, regardless of what you do.
Gotcha. Now, some blogs out there suggest that BTK used steganography and encryption. Is that even remotely true?
Not that we're aware of. And to show you from a skill set perspective, when he asked if he could send us a floppy, and we had been observing him using basically Word documents to communicate with us, he'd type up his chapter 3 in a Word document and print it out and send it to us. If you remember, if you saw his MOID ruse word search puzzle, that was basically an Excel spreadsheet but if you looked at it, you notice that the letters and numbers are justified on different sides of the cell, which is what Excel does. So from a skill set perspective, he was unable to put all of everything in the center of the cell or everything on the left side of the cell. So from in looking at analyzing the skill set he displayed, everything from not being able to left or center or right justify all the characters and all the cells, or one of the communications, he was having troubles with the margins and the tabbing, so it was all messed up. So there you kind of get, when they're asking me, "Hey, is there value in him sending us a floppy?" I'm looking back. Well, the guy's has demonstrated very low technical skill set in using Office and that type of thing. So there'd be then a good chance we would recover something off the floppy. And conversely, there's a low chance of having a high skill set for like steganography or something like that. So, I mean, we are more concerned about him taping it to the side of a bomb or something like that.
Was there anything looking back that you would have done differently in this digital investigation now that you have 20 years plus to reflect on what you did back then? And it's probably longer than, well, 20 years plus. Would you do something different today?
I don't think so. I think, I mean, from a preparation and training perspective, there was three of us in the office. At our level, we were used to doing search warrants and taking one or two computers and that type of thing. So then we're looking at, let's go to the library and image 9 computers or whatever it was. From a bandwidth and tooling perspective, we weren't really set up for that scale unless you just want to be there 2 days type of thing. I mean, our answer to that then was let's call Mark Johnson, the RCFL, and run this past him and say, hey, first of all, when I get this, I'm going to send you the image, and you're going to double check me. You're going to peer review this and make sure I'm not an idiot. That it surely can't be this easy. And I did. And then when we get ready to do the search warrant, then they brought. There was like 6 or 8 or 9 of them, from the RCFL came down. So the only thing that would have made it easier would be if we had enough tooling and bandwidth and everything to do all of it ourselves, but we didn't need to because, like in my presentation, I talk about, invite your friends and have them bring their toys. So that's what we did, and they came down and they split up among all the scenes, and so really forensically process, search warrant searching. I really can't think of anything we would have done different.
Okay. And then so to kind of piggyback on that, it sounds like you contacted Mark Johnson in advance, and then his role was to peer review the work that you did.
Right. Yeah, when we got the first communication offering to send a floppy, and I'm thinking like, no way this guy's going to send a floppy, and it can't be that easy. But just in case, I got old Mark Johnson, and so we set up hey, I'll send it to you, and you double check my work and make sure that I don't want to be that guy. To screw it up and that type of thing. So yeah.
And were you the one that ran the test on the disc and made the decision that you needed those tests run on the disc before you move forward?
The testing for the X-rays?
Yes.
Yeah. So the Home Depot communication had references to bomb, and during the interview he said he was going to. In an upcoming drop, he was going to have explosives in it. So they wanted to make sure that if we did receive a drop that, got a floppy disk taped to a bomb of some kind or a package, that if we run it through X-ray, that it's not going to hurry things. So it was, we put some data on the disk, we hash the entire disk, we run it back and forth through the X-ray machine a bunch of times, hash it again, verify the hash, run it back and forth through the X-ray, and we do that a dozen times, whatever. And so, pretty confident it's not going to hurt anything.
Now, this wasn't just a digital forensics case. It really was emotional because this killer had been out there for 30 years in the community, and you had been aware of him and probably had some just awareness from being in law enforcement that he was out there and doing these heinous crimes. What was the hardest part of this case for you personally?
I don't know. I mean, a lot of it for me was just a technical exercise. It's kind of, if you do a lot of computer forensics, like I was in a role where I didn't talk to victims, I didn't talk to suspects, I didn't talk to witnesses. I mean, I talked to floppy disks and drives and that kind of thing. So you don't get the emotional attachment that that you have with that. So so as the forensic guy, you're watching everybody else that does have the emotional attachment with the families and that type of thing. But so it was kind of weird because you're in the room watching, but you're not participating from that emotional connection perspective. But at the same time, doing computer forensics, you kind of build up by the end of your career of doing that, you've looked at several million pictures. You want to have that distance, as given the type of material you're looking at. So, but I mean, for me, it was literally a technical exercise. It was fun. It was cool. No doubt about that. But it was a technical, personal, professional challenge to overcome that. But I also didn't have to meet with the victims' families or anything like that. So.
Are there any other myths or real facts out there that you've heard that you would like to be put to rest?
Not that I can think of.
We've got all tackled in this interview already.
I think so. I know there's been some recent notoriety on some stuff out of Oklahoma and identifying him as a candidate suspect in some stuff down there. That sheriff is no longer he's no longer the sheriff there, so I don't think that's going to go anywhere. It would be interesting if that was pursued, but I don't think his replacement, the DA's office down there, I don't think they believe it's strong enough to pursue that. But there was it is a very interesting, intriguing storyline that has a lot of overlap in travel and timing and location and everything with some of Raiders. Now, can you convict him on that? No, but I think it's certainly worthy of investigation. But someone would have to pick that up now in order to continue pursuing that.
Well, in that Excel spreadsheet you found of him like tracking his mileage and stuff. There wasn't
Yeah.
anything so far away as Oklahoma that you recall?
I don't recall on that, but I know from talking with that sheriff, Rader places himself in northern Oklahoma and in that area at different times. Which again, okay, you put him in the area, but you can't convict him on that. But yeah, so there are some certainly interesting. You hear the sheriff talk about it, it's an interesting story. So then it's plausible, but again, you got to beyond a reasonable doubt. So.
Did you sit in with interviews with Dennis Rader?
Yeah, for the most part, I didn't interview him. I mean, I really didn't have contact. So we arrested him, and then of course I was it was on site doing search warrants while they're doing the interviews. So the second day when they're getting ready to take him over to the jail, so they putting the belly chain and shackles and handcuff on him and an entry vest and everything, so they can take him down the street to the jail. And they're doing that. And I just got back from finishing a search warrant. So I kind of stepped in the doorway of the room and said, something like, Dennis, it's nice to finally put a face go along with the name I found on the floppy disk. He says, "Oh, so you're the one, huh?" I said, "Yeah, I'm the one." So we kind of joke back and forth. He says, "Oh, if I ever get out of here, I'm going to have to find you and stuff your mouth full of a case of floppy disks." So we joke back and forth on it. And then at the end of it, at the end of a little exchange, he said, someday we're gonna have to get together and trade secrets, and which I thought was interesting because he just went through. He'd been in the interview room for 36 hours, being interviewed off and on like that. And at the end of which he says, "Hey, let's get together and trade secrets." So if he ever listened to this, you can tell him I'm waiting for that invitation, and he's put me on his visitor list so I can go visit him. We'll trade secrets.
Stacy and I get this question asked a lot, and you probably do too. What kind of advice do you give those who are currently starting their careers in digital forensics?
From a career path, what is hot right now is cloud and AI. So cloud security. So if you're looking for what career do I want to do, chase one of those. Be very good at the basics. When I enlisted in the military, I had a platoon sergeant that was Vietnam vet, and his concept was shoot, move, and communicate. Whatever, if you can shoot, move, and communicate, you'll survive in combat. And so whatever shoot, move, communicate means in our field, be very good at the basics and you'll survive. So that's from a career path perspective. I was at the right place at the right time with the right skill sets accidentally. I just happened to be in narcs and we're kicking in doors and taking people's guns and drugs and all like that and leaving their computers in there. And, kind of a geek. I said, well, that's uncool. Surely there's something we can do. And myself and another detective, we did the research and said, sure enough, there's a grant. And we got the grant, nowhere knowing that 6 years later, we would be doing forensics on Dennis Rader's floppy disk. So it's one of those that do what you can now and prepare yourself for whatever the future brings. It's not always about right now. Do what you get very good at, shoot, move, communicate, because you don't know that 6 years from now you might be looking at a very critical floppy disk.
Randy, thanks again for sharing your experience. It's so important that we could correct these myths and preserve the truth behind cases like this.
It was fun to do. Yeah. I see the books out there and like you get frustrated because like that's not true. But who's going to correct it? So.
Right. And so we're glad that we have you here to correct that. This case didn't just change lives, it changed how digital evidence is handled across the board. It changed how digital forensic examiners looked at evidence. It made me realize, and I'm sure it made Stacy realize, that this was a career for us. And I know I wanted to make a difference. So it really did bring it to light for all of us, especially that presentation back in.
I still have it. I still travel around doing it occasionally.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Because it's so pivotal. I mean, even though it's old, it's still important. And there's still, I think, lessons that bear repeating.
Yeah. I mean, literally, and you saw it. The first half of it was, let me tell you about the crimes and the evidence and the arrests. And the second half was a bunch of excerpts from the interview. It's from a forensic perspective. So it's excerpts from the interview on how the forensic stuff was used to get the confession. Literally, Dennis Rader's landlord tapping on the floppy disks and, saying, here's what it is, and showing the printouts and everything like that. And you can see Rader reading the printouts, and he's just totally zoned out. He's not paying attention at all because he's now so absorbed in the forensic evidence, he's seeing how he got caught. And so it wasn't just the forensics. It was, not just the forensics to identify, but it was how that was then used as part of the larger case to get him to confess. He wouldn't have confessed without that.
So interesting. And let's wrap up. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back soon with another case, another perspective, and more truth.
Until then, stay safe, stay sharp, and as always, keep parsing the truth one bite at a time.